So you guys, welcome back to my second video on Alexandria. Boy, we have a lot on our plate today. So let's just get right into it. I promised you more ancient sites for this video, and one of the most important sites is just a mere 30 minutes of walking away. Most of what we see today are regular stops for tourists, so do try to get an early morning start. You know, if you want to avoid those big crowds. Now, another thing I would like to mention, don't be afraid to take different routes to your destination. I usually use Google Maps to see the best route. However, I made my own route this time in order to explore some other streets. Now, the street I took was maybe a little longer but less busy with traffic, so it was easier to cross the street, which sometimes can be difficult because of the traffic. And it's a straight road you can follow for some time. Considering the size of the city, the less turns you have to take, the better. And here we are, our first stop for today, one of ancient Alexandria's most important religious sites. Now, if there is one thing I want you to remember from this site, it's the following. Pompey's pillar has nothing to do with Pompey whatsoever, like at all. In fact, I don't understand why they don't change the name, because there are tourists today who really believe it belongs to Pompey simply because of the name. Now, if you don't know who Pompey is, here's the short version. Pompey, or Pompey the Great, was a famous general and former friend of Julius Caesar, who was defeated by Caesar at the Battle of Pharsalus. Afterwards, Pompey fled from Pharsalus to Egypt, where he was assassinated on the order of Ptolemy XIII, who was the brother of Cleopatra VII. It's only in the Middle Ages when travelers who passed by here believed that the ashes or remains of Pompey were placed in a pot at the top of the column. This is how it got the nickname Pompey's Pillar. However, this makes no sense. Pompey died in 48 BC, whilst this pillar was built in 297 AD. That's more than 300 years apart, and it's made clear who built it. Pompey has nothing to do with this pillar. So, that in mind, I represent you much better. So, the column was made in honor of the Roman Emperor Diocletian. The pillar is a Roman triumphal column made of a single piece of red Aswan granite built in 297 AD. It's the largest of its type constructed outside the capitals of Rome and Constantinople, located here at the Serapeum of Alexandria. It has a height of 26 meters and has a weight estimated at 285 tons. During his reign, a serious revolt in the city took place, and Diocletian came here in person, ordering the city to be besieged. After about 8 months of resistance, the city finally surrendered and returned to Roman rule. As a result of the siege, there was famine in the city, and therefore the emperor ordered that a portion of the food which normally sent to Rome to be given to the people of Alexandria instead. He even exempted them from paying taxes during these hard times as well. This memorial column was erected in gratitude for what Diocletian did for them during these hard times. Apparently, on the upper part of the western side is an inscription in Greek, which reads the following. To the most just emperor, tutelary of Alexandria, Diocletian, the Invincible, Posthumus the prefect of Egypt, who is probably the man who erected this monument. Also, you can find these 2 red granite sphinxes, who were part of 3 or more in the original temple complex here. These 2 were erected either by Ptolemy IV or VI. Now, there is more to see here than just that pillar. On both your right and left, you can find more ancient objects. As is typical for every Greek site here, there are remains of Greek Corinthian-style columns, but also statues and blocks with inscriptions brought here from all over Egypt, even sphinxes apparently from Heliopolis. The Greeks liked the art and statues of the ancient Egyptians and so decided to move them here. But what is so important about this place? Well, as I mentioned before, this place was known as the Serapeum. It was a temple dedicated to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis. However, there is evidence the deity was known before the time of the Ptolemies. The cult of Serapis was introduced during the 3rd century BC on the orders of Pharaoh Ptolemy I. It was meant to unify the Greeks and Egyptians in his realm. Now, Serapis was a combination of the traditional Egyptian gods Osiris and Apis, but given the attributes of the Hellenistic gods Zeus, Helios, Dionysus, Hades, and Asclepius. Serapis was thus a supreme god of divine majesty, and the sun, presented by Zeus and Helios, fertility by Dionysus, the underworld and afterlife by Hades, Apis, and Osiris, and finally healing by Asclepius. However, his connection to the afterlife and fertility were always primary, and since the link was made between Osiris and Serapis, Osiris his family followed. His wife Iset and his son Horus were thus given new names as the popular goddess Isis and their son Harpocrates. And so the Greco-Egyptian triad of Alexandria was born. But why was the temple built here? Well, if there is one thing that is well known, it's that Alexandria was founded a completely new city, right? Well, apparently no. When Alexander came here, there was a settlement here on a mount for almost 1,000 years called Rhakotis. According to Strabo, Rhakotis was the home of Egyptian sentinels guarding the Nile from invaders. Alexandria was planned by Dinocrates of Rhodes. The existing small village of Rhakotis, then a fishing port, was incorporated and became an Egyptian suburb of the city. Most of Alexandria's Egyptian workforce lived here. That does explain why most Egyptians continue to refer to the city of Alexandria as Rhakotis. Now, according to Tacitus, the Egyptian priests gave to Ptolemy I instructions to obtain a certain statue from a temple in Pontus, which is on the northern coast of modern Turkey along the Black Sea. First, they visited the Oracle of Delphi, who confirms when they reached the king Sidromethes at the capital of Pontus, Sinope, they find him reluctant to part with the statue. But according to legend, the god then leaves the temple of his own will and conveys the party back to Alexandria, where a new temple is established at Rhakotis, where the god Osiris had been worshipped. And since the new god Serapis was to be linked with Osiris, it was the perfect location for this grand complex. After all, it's all about location, right? Now, the final great temple complex itself was built by Ptolemy III. Since the Greeks preferred their temples to be on some higher ground, a large platform was built here on top of the Mount of Rhakotis, since it was the only high point in the city. A wall was built surrounding the platform, and a colonnade was built on the inside. The temple itself had a classical structure and stood inside the colonnade. However, it is said to be just big enough to hold the cult statue of Serapis. So don't imagine a colossal temple, but what it lacked in size, it made up with beauty and splendor. Looking from here, on the right side of the pillar would have been the entrance. After climbing up the 100 steps of the stairway, you would enter the complex and see the pillar on your left, and the temple to your right. The statue of Serapis was said to be so large that each hand touched the wall on either side, inside the temple. At his feet was Cerberus, the three-headed dog of the Greek underworld. The temple was made of gleaming marble and painted and gilded on the inside with all kind of precious materials from around the known world. The Serapeum was without a doubt the largest and most magnificent of all the temples in Alexandria. Now, let's continue our tour, shall we? At the back of the site, you can find two rock-cut galleries. In the first gallery, you can find a black basalt statue of Serapis in the form of a bull that dates back to the reign of Emperor Hadrian. Even though this one is a copy, with the original being in the Greco-Roman Museum, it's still very impressive. Apparently, a common way to greet the deity in the temples was to raise your right hand to the statue in order to greet it. So hey, when in Alexandria. Hi Serapis, thanks for allowing me to look around. In the second gallery, known as the Daughter Library, we find again a long passageway that seems to keep going. The original Great Library of Alexandria, known as the Mother Library, was located in the royal district of the city. However, with as many as 700,000 scrolls, there was need for some extra storage. Thus, the Daughter Library was created here in the Serapeum. Now, even though people know it was located here, they weren't sure where it was located inside the temple complex. It was believed to be located here in the second gallery, but now there are some saying this gallery is actually an Anubidian, or a burial cache for the mummies of the god Anubis. Personally, I do find it difficult to imagine scrolls to be placed in these rock-cut niches. Doesn't really seem easy to find a single scroll if you would come down here to find one, would it? Maybe it was indeed used for animal mummies. I don't know, and even experts aren't sure. Hey, if you guys have an idea or a suggestion what this place could be, please leave it in the comments. So, now the big question. How did the end came to this glorious temple complex? Well, the Serapeum was closed in July of 325 AD, likely on the orders of the first Christian emperor, Constantine, during the persecution of pagans in the late Roman Empire. In 391 AD, the Christian bishop of Alexandria, Theophilus, was given a closed-down temple by the emperor to convert into a church, as was apparently very common. When a group of Christian workmen started to search the building, they found cult objects and statues in the temple, and they gave them to the Christian bishop. Now, of course, it would be nice of him to give them to the pagan community, since there were still many pagans in the city. However, it seemed to him a very good idea to have the cult objects paraded through the streets to be mocked and ridiculed. As you can imagine, the pagans of the city were anything but happy, with all these people mocking their gods, considering they already had so many laws against them, like banning them from doing sacrifices, shutting down the temples, and even government officials losing their jobs unless they converted. For them, this was the final straw. The pagans took up arms and attacked the Christian population of the city, killing many of them before being forced to take refuge inside the Serapeum, fortifying it against attacks. They even forced the Christians who they had taken hostage to sacrifice to the gods and torturing them if they refused. This horrible incident was reported to the emperor, who declared the slain Christians to be martyrs. He then made a declaration to resolve the situation. The pagans in the Serapeum were to be pardoned, but the temple itself was to be given to the Christians to be destroyed. When this was read aloud and it became clear that the pagans were definitely being held responsible, the Christians were shouting for joy. and attacked the temple en masse. The temple of Serapis, which had stood for more than 6 centuries, was vandalized, looted, and demolished. The bishop then went on a spree through the city, demolishing every temple, it was said almost column by column. As for the images of the gods, according to Socrates, were melted down to be made into pots and other utensils for the church. But it's surprising that the site of the Serapeum was not converted into a church. It became disused. 2 churches did arose nearby, but not inside the complex. The main enclosure and its colonnade did survive and are mentioned by medieval Arabic writers. But eventually they were destroyed in 1169. Only the Pillar of Diocletian remains and stands to this day. So, now you know about the clash that took place here. Personally, I was lost for words when I found out. I believe religion is something personal, and you should be able to believe what you want, when you want, and how you want. And as long as you don't force your beliefs onto others, then your faith should be respected. So, with this in mind, let me end this, ironically, with some words from a Christian chronicler named Lactantius from the 3rd century, who said the following about the Roman pagan emperor Decius, who is well known for his persecution of Christians. Decius appeared to the world as an accursed wild beast to afflict the church, and who but a bad man would persecute religion? Who indeed? Whew! Okay, you guys, that was a lot of information, I know, but let's face it, this place deserves to have its full story told. With this important side finished, let's move on.